£268,275. That's not a random number, that's the ceiling on your tax-free cash, and once your pension pot crosses it, the rules of the game change completely. Most people assume 25% tax-free is just always there. That as the pot grows, so does the tax-free slice. It feels logical, it feels fair. But that's not how it works anymore. Since April 2024, when HMRC replaced the old lifetime allowance with something called the lump sum allowance, that 25% stopped being a percentage and became a fixed cap. £268,275. Full stop. If your pension is worth £1 million today, the maths works out. But if it grows to £1,200,000, the extra £200,000 of growth doesn't bring more tax-free cash with it. It just sits there, waiting to be taxed at your marginal rate when you take it. That's not a technicality. That's a significant shift in how pension wealth actually works. And a lot of people haven't been told clearly enough.
I've watched this happen more than once.
Someone delays taking their cash because they think waiting lets the tax-free amount grow. It doesn't. Not anymore. The pot grows. The free slice stays the same, and every year of delay potentially costs them. In this video, I'm going to walk through 7 reasons to take your tax-free cash, including the 2 that most financial conversations skip over. One involves a tax trap that can hit 55% if you're not careful. The other is a maths gap that shows up quietly in larger pots and quietly drains value year after year. Neither of these is about panic. This is about understanding the numbers before they make decisions for you. Before we get into the deeper mechanics, let's go through the 7 reasons most people already know, or half know. Some of these will feel familiar. Others might reframe something you've been putting off. A quick note on the structure first. When you take tax-free cash from a pension, you've got 2 main routes. You can take the full 25% as a lump sum up front, clean, straightforward, done. Or you can access it gradually through Flexi Access Drawdown, where each withdrawal you make is 25% tax-free and 75% taxable. The right approach depends on your tax position, your income needs, and frankly, what you're going to do with the money. Both are valid. Neither is automatically better. Right. The 7 reasons. Reason 1, paying off the mortgage. If you're carrying a mortgage into your 60s, which plenty of people are given how rates moved in 2022 and 2023, using tax-free cash to clear it is one of the few genuinely straightforward decisions in personal finance. The average 2-year fixed rate is sitting above 4.5% right now. Guaranteed. Tax-free return of 4.5% by eliminating that debt. You won't find that in a cash ISA. One conversation I've had a few times is with people who feel uneasy about spending their pension early. But clearing a mortgage isn't spending, it's restructuring. The money doesn't vanish, it reappears as reduced monthly outgoings, which changes everything about what retirement actually feels like day to day. Reason 2, spousal pension contributions. This one gets underused. If your spouse or partner has unused pension allowance, either because they worked part-time, took time out, or simply didn't earn as much, your tax-free cash can fund a contribution on their behalf. They receive basic rate tax relief on it automatically. If they're a non-taxpayer, they can still contribute up to £2,880 net per year, and HMRC tops it up to £3,600. That's free money sitting on the table, and it helps build a second pension pot that may be taxed at a lower rate than yours when it's eventually drawn. Reason 3, bridging income before state pension. The state pension age is currently 66, rising to 67 between 2026 and 2028. If you've retired at 60 or 62, that's a gap of several years with no state pension income coming in. Tax-free cash can bridge that period without pushing you into a higher tax band because it's, well, tax-free. Used carefully, this can mean living comfortably through your early retirement years without drawing heavily on taxable income. That matters more than people realize when they're doing their initial retirement sums. Reason 4, optimizing a defined benefit scheme through AVCs. If you have a defined benefit pension, a final salary scheme, you may also have additional voluntary contributions sitting alongside it. In many DB schemes, you can use AVC funds to provide your 25% tax-free lump sum, which protects the DB income itself from being commuted at what is often a poor exchange rate. This is scheme-specific, so it needs proper checking. But if it applies to you, it's a meaningful difference. Reason 5. Moving money into an ISA. The ISA allowance is £20,000 per year. That resets every April. Tax-free cash from your pension, once withdrawn, can be moved straight into a stocks and shares ISA or cash ISA, where it grows free of income tax and capital gains tax going forward. For people who expect to remain invested for another 10 to 15 years, this is essentially a tax shelter transfer. You're moving money from one protected environment to another, but the ISA version doesn't carry the same risks around future rule changes. Worth thinking about, particularly if you're concerned about what future budgets might bring. Reason 6. Healthcare costs or early enjoyment. This is the one people sometimes feel embarrassed to mention. You've worked for 30 or 40 years. Using some of your pension to pay for a private health procedure, adapt your home, take a trip you've been putting off, or simply enjoy your early 60s while your health is still good, that's not irresponsible. It's the whole point. I've been close to conversations where people delayed everything, kept the pot perfectly intact, and then found their health deteriorating faster than expected after 75. The money was there. The opportunity wasn't. That's a difficult thing to watch. The FCA has noted that a significant proportion of people who take their tax-free cash leave it sitting in a current account, earning little or nothing, effectively losing value to inflation year after year. So if you're going to take it, have a plan for it, but don't let a vague sense of duty keep you from using it. Reason 7. Concern about future legislation. You're not wrong to think about this. The rules around pensions have changed more than once in the last decade. The lifetime allowance was introduced, increased, decreased, frozen, and then scrapped. The lump sum allowance replaced it. And as of the autumn budget 2024, pension pots are now set to be included in inheritance tax calculations from April 2027. Less than 12 months away. Nobody knows exactly what comes next. Taking what you're entitled to now, while the rules are clear, is a reasonable response to that uncertainty. It's not panic. It's paying attention. You've spent decades building this. Wanting to protect it isn't a mistake. Now, though 7 reasons are real, and for many people, 1 or 2 of them alone would be enough. But there are 2 things sitting underneath all of this that change the maths significantly, depending on the size of your pot. And that's what we need to look at properly. Let's talk about the number that most pension conversations gloss over. £268,275. That is the lump sum allowance, the total amount of tax-free cash you can take from your pensions across your lifetime. It was set when HMRC abolished the lifetime allowance in April 2024, and unlike the old system, it does not move with your pot. It's fixed. It doesn't adjust for inflation. It doesn't scale up because your investments performed well. Here's where it gets important. If your pension pot is worth around £1,073,100, roughly 4 times the LSA, then 25% of your pot and the LSA happen to align almost exactly. You take £268,275 tax-free. The maths works cleanly. But what if you're in your early 60s? Your pot is already at £900,000, and it's still growing. Let's say it reaches £1,200,000 by the time you decide to draw. Your tax-free entitlement doesn't grow with it. It stays at £268,275. The additional £127,000 of growth that would have been tax-free under the old 25% logic. That's now fully taxable income when you draw it at your marginal rate. For a higher rate taxpayer, that's 40%. That's not a small difference. That's potentially £50,000 in additional tax on growth that, had you taken the cash earlier and reinvested it outside the pension, might have been subject to capital gains tax instead. currently 18% for basic rate taxpayers, 24% for higher rate. Still a tax, but not 40%. This is what I mean by the dead zone. Once you've hit the LSA ceiling, every pound of further growth inside your pension is being taxed at income tax rates, not CGT rates. The pension wrapper, which was designed to be efficient, becomes less efficient than a general investment account for the growth that happens beyond that point. I used to think the advice was simple. Leave it in the pension as long as possible, let compound growth do its work. And for most of your working life, that's right. The tax relief on contributions is genuinely valuable. But the LSA changes the equation in the later years. Past a certain pot size, staying fully invested inside the pension isn't automatically the patient, sensible choice. It can quietly become the expensive one. So what's the alternative? Taking your tax-free cash and reinvesting it in a stocks and shares ISA, a general investment account, or a combination of both, means future growth on that money is sheltered from income tax entirely or taxed at CGT rates rather than your marginal rate. Over 10 or 15 years, on a sum of £268,275, the difference in tax treatment compounds meaningfully. Let's put a rough number on it. If that £268,275 grows at 5% annually over 15 years inside a pension, it becomes around £557,000. Withdrawn at 40% income tax, the net is roughly £334,000. The same sum growing at the same rate inside an ISA, £557,000. All of it. No tax on withdrawal. That's a gap of over £220,000, not because of investment performance, but purely because of which wrapper the money sat in. That's the mechanism. Not a loophole, not a trick, just the structural difference between income tax and ISA treatment applied over time. One thing worth saying clearly, none of this means you should rush to empty your pension the moment you turn 57. The right answer depends on your total income, your tax band, whether you're still contributing, and what you'd actually do with the money once it's out. These are the conversations worth having with a qualified advisor. But understanding the dead zone means you're at least asking the right questions, rather than assuming that leaving the pot untouched is always the cautious, sensible option. Because sometimes the cautious option has a cost. It just doesn't arrive as a bill. It arrives quietly, in the form of tax you didn't have to pay. And there's one more layer to this. A mistake I've seen people make, and it's an understandable one, is thinking, right, I'll take the tax-free cash, and then I'll put it straight back into my pension to keep benefiting from the wrapper. Get the tax-free cash, claim the tax relief on the new contribution, and essentially have the best of both worlds. That's not how HMRC sees it, and the consequences of getting it wrong are severe enough that we need to spend a moment on it properly. HMRC calls it pension recycling. The penalty for triggering it is 55% of the amount involved, not 20%, not 40%, 55%. This catches people who think they've found a clever way to take tax-free cash and then immediately reinvest it back into a pension to claim tax relief on the contribution. On paper, it looks like a double benefit. Tax-free out, tax relief back in. In practice, HMRC treats it as an unauthorized payment, and the charge reflects that. The rule isn't new, but it's caught more people since the LSA came in, partly because the conversation around pension flexibility has increased, and partly because the logic of recycling feels intuitive when you're trying to make the most of what you have. So let's be precise about what actually triggers it. 3 conditions have to be met simultaneously. First, the tax-free lump sum you've taken has to exceed £7,500. Second, your pension contributions have to increase by more than 30% compared to what you were contributing in the period before. Third, HMRC has to determine that the two are connected, that the decision to contribute more was linked to having taken the cash. That third condition is the one people underestimate. HMRC doesn't need a signed document. They don't need you to have told anyone. They look at the timing and the numbers. If you took £50,000 in tax-free cash in October and your pension contributions went up significantly in November, that pattern alone is enough to open an investigation. The burden then shifts to you to demonstrate the increase wasn't connected to the withdrawal, and the maths of getting it wrong is stark. Take £50,000 in tax-free cash, trigger a recycling charge, and HMRC can classify the full £50,000 as an unauthorised payment. The charge 55% of that sum. That's £27,500. More than half of what you took out, gone immediately. You haven't gained anything. You've lost. There's a subtler version of this that catches people who aren't trying to be clever at all. Someone retires, takes their tax-free cash, and then returns to part-time work a year later. Their new employer offers a pension, they join it automatically through auto-enrollment, and their contributions quietly restart. They weren't planning to recycle. They were just going back to work. But if the timing falls within HMRC's window and the contribution level crosses the 30% threshold, the recycling rules can still apply. This is why the decision to take tax-free cash shouldn't happen in isolation. It needs to sit within a broader picture of what you're doing with your income, your employment, and any existing contribution patterns, especially if you're still working in any capacity. The straightforward way to avoid all of this: once you've taken your tax-free cash, don't increase pension contributions in the period immediately following. If you want to keep investing, use an ISA, use a general investment account. Keep the two streams separate and keep the paper trail clean. If you do have a legitimate reason for increasing contributions, a bonus, an inheritance, a change in employment, document it clearly and separately from the withdrawal. HMRC's approach here isn't arbitrary. The recycling rules exist because without them, a higher rate taxpayer could theoretically cycle the same money through a pension repeatedly, claiming 40% tax relief each time on money that's already been sheltered. The system would be gamed endlessly, so the rules are firm and the penalty is deliberately high enough to remove any financial incentive. Knowing that doesn't make it less stressful if you're navigating it, but understanding why the rule exists, what structural problem it's solving, means you can plan around it properly rather than stumbling into it. Take the cash. Don't recycle it. Keep it clean. There's a date worth having in your head, the 6th of April 2027. That's when the rules around pensions and inheritance tax change. Right now, pension pots sit outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. When you die, whatever is left in your pension doesn't count toward the £325,000 threshold. It passes to your beneficiaries largely free of the 40% IHT charge that applies to the rest of your estate. That's been one of the quiet advantages of keeping money inside a pension later in life. From April 2027, that changes. Unspent pension funds will be brought into the estate for IHT calculations. If your total estate, including the pension, exceeds the threshold, the excess gets taxed at 40%. The pension stops being a shelter and becomes part of the taxable pile. This was announced in the Autumn Budget 2024. It's not speculation, it's scheduled legislation, and it's now less than 12 months away. So what does that mean in practice? Take someone with a pension pot of £400,000 and other assets, a property, some savings, totaling £300,000. Currently, the pension sits outside the estate. The £300,000 in other assets falls below the threshold. No IHT. After April 2027, the pension is included. Total estate, £700,000. After the nil rate band, the taxable portion is £375,000. The IHT bill, £150,000. That £150,000 doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from what your family inherits. ONS data shows that for men reaching 65 in the UK today, average life expectancy sits at around 84. For women, it's closer to 87. That sounds reassuring. But the same data shows a meaningful drop in functional health. The ability to live independently and make active financial decisions, typically beginning somewhere between 75 and 80. The window between now and then is shorter than it feels. I'm not saying this to be bleak. I'm saying it because the IHT change in April 2027 is not a distant risk to monitor. For anyone with a sizable pension and other assets, it is a live planning question that needs an answer before that date, not after. The 25% tax-free cash you're entitled to today is yours to take now at no tax cost. Once it's out, it can be gifted, invested in an ISA, used to pay down debt, or simply restructured in a way that gives your family a cleaner outcome. Inside the pension after April 2027, that same sum could be taxed at 40% on death. That's not a marginal difference. That's the difference between leaving your family something meaningful and leaving them a tax bill alongside it. None of this means you should drain your pension tomorrow. Timing, tax bands, income needs, these all matter. But the IHT cliff in April 2027 is a real deadline, not a theoretical one, and deadlines have a way of arriving faster than planning does. Let's be honest about something. A lot of people reading about pension tax changes aren't doing it from a position of calm curiosity. They're doing it because they saw a headline about Rachel Reeves, or heard something at dinner that unsettled them, or woke up at 3 a.m. running numbers that may or may not be accurate. That's not irrational. That's what it feels like to have spent 30 or 40 years building something and then watch the rules shift around it. The feeling is real. What matters is whether the decision that comes from it is grounded in maths or in anxiety. Psychologists call it loss aversion, the tendency to feel the pain of losing something more sharply than the pleasure of gaining the same amount. In pension decisions, it shows up as a kind of paralysis. You don't want to make the wrong move, so you make no move at all. And no move in this context isn't neutral. It has a cost. We've already seen what that cost looks like in the dead zone and the IHT cliff. But there's an equal and opposite mistake, which is doing something purely because you're frightened. Emptying a pension in a panic, without a plan for what comes next, can push you into a higher tax band in a single year, trigger charges you weren't expecting, and leave you with a large sum in a current account earning less than inflation. The FCA has flagged this pattern repeatedly. People taking lump sums and then leaving the money sitting idle because they hadn't thought through the next step. We've all worked too long to make decisions like that. So what does the non-panic version look like? It looks like understanding a mechanism called UFPLS, Uncrystallized Funds Pension Lump Sum. It's less dramatic than it sounds. Instead of taking all your tax-free cash in one go, UFPLS lets you take smaller withdrawals from your pension, each of which is 25% tax-free and 75% taxable. If your annual income needs are modest, you can structure withdrawals to stay within your personal allowance of £12,570, meaning the taxable 75% portion attracts little or no income tax. Combined with the 25% tax-free element, you can draw up to around £16,760 per year from your pension with virtually no tax liability at all. That's not a loophole. That's the system working as intended for someone who understands how to use it. The difference between the panic response and the planned response isn't bravery. It's just information. Knowing what the actual numbers look like, your pot size relative to the LSA, your likely tax band in retirement, the April 2027 deadline, means you can make a decision that's yours rather than one that was made for you by inertia or fear. We've spent this whole video going through the mechanisms. That's the point of all of it, not to alarm, but to equip. Right. Let's make this practical. Everything we've covered, the LSA ceiling, the recycling trap, the IHT cliff, the UFPLS structure, only matters if it changes what you actually do. So here are the steps worth working through, in order. Step 1. Find out where your pot sits relative to £268,275. If your pension is worth less than around £1,073,100, the full 25% tax-free cash is still available to you. If it's approaching or above that figure, you need to know exactly how much of your LSA you've already used, particularly if you have multiple pensions or have taken any tax-free cash previously. HMRC tracks this across all schemes. Your pension provider can tell you your remaining LSA entitlement. Ask them directly. Step 2. Model the UFPLS withdrawal strategy. If you don't need a large lump sum immediately, consider drawing £16,760 per year using the UFPLS method. That figure combines your £12,570 personal allowance with the 25% tax-free element of each withdrawal. Done consistently, it draws down your pension in a tax-efficient way without triggering higher rate liability, and it reduces the pot size that will be subject to IHT from April 2027 onwards. Small, steady, intentional. It's not exciting. It works. Step 3. If your pot is large, consider the ISA transfer strategy. Once money is out of the pension tax-free, it can go into a stocks and shares ISA, up to £20,000 per year, per person per tax year. If you have a spouse or partner, that's £40,000 per year sheltered from income tax and capital gains tax going forward. Over several years, a meaningful portion of your pension wealth can be repositioned into a wrapper that carries no IHT exposure, no income tax on withdrawal, and no exposure to future pension legislation changes. The pension served its purpose during accumulation. The ISA serves a different purpose in distribution. The trade-off is this. If you do nothing, if you leave the pot untouched, let it grow past the LSA and hold it through April 2027, you're making a choice. That choice may mean your family pays 40% inheritance tax on money you could have withdrawn tax-free. It may mean future growth is taxed at income tax rates rather than CGT rates. It may mean a recycling mistake if contributions restart without proper planning. None of those outcomes are inevitable, but they become likely without deliberate action. You've done the hard part. 30-40 years of contributing, managing, waiting. The last mile of this is just knowing which door to walk through. 25% tax-free cash isn't the destination. It's a tool. And like any tool, it's only useful if you pick it up at the right moment, for the right reason, with some idea of what you're building. The £268,275 ceiling is fixed. The April 2027 deadline is fixed. Your marginal tax rate in retirement is something you can still influence, but that window narrows every year you wait without a plan. I review my own SIP every few months now, not obsessively, but deliberately, checking where the pot sits relative to the LSA. Thinking about the sequencing. Making sure I'm not drifting into the dead zone without noticing. It's not complicated once you know what to look for, but it does require looking. If you want to work through the numbers yourself, comment math below and I'll send you the spreadsheet I use to calculate LSA position, UFPLS withdrawal modeling, and the IHT exposure before and after April 2027. It won't make the decision for you, but it'll show you clearly what you're working with. One last thing. Nothing in this video is personal financial advice. The mechanisms are real, the numbers are accurate, but your situation has details that a video can't account for. Your other income, your health, your family, your timeline. Before you move anything, speak to a qualified financial advisor who understands pension decumulation. The conversation you have with them will be better for having watched this. That's all for this one.